Hey, Tony, thank you for taking the time today to join me. Why don't you give us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. It's great to join you here today. So I'm Tony Sager with the Center for Internet Security, and I think I'm one of the longest continuously serving cyber defenders in the industry. So I'm at 45 years now and counting. First 35 at the National Security Agency, and back then we called it Communication Security or ComSec. But
Sure.
as a math computer science guy, I get to kind of ride the wave that eventually became cybersecurity. And did my background technically, and then as a manager, was in vulnerability analysis.
Okay.
So finding flaws in the mathematics of protocols and crypto algorithms, and then later software implementations and engineering and software kind of, low-level embedded systems. I mean, that was
Sure.
kind of the state of the art in the 80s. And so I spent my life, studying flaws for a living, right? How do systems fail? And then kind of the last third was like consumed by this. Why do we keep finding the same problems over and over again? Maybe
Right.
we're not learning something here. So 35 years of that, retired in 2012, and spent the rest of my time now in my second act in nonprofit work.
Okay.
So the Center for Net Security, we're a small but mighty nonprofit, and very unusual in that we have a 24/7 live, nationwide mission. We are the multi-state ISAC, Information Sharing Analysis Centers for state, local, tribal, territorial governments. So that work is sponsored by Homeland Security. So
Right.
Think of big watch center, incidents, advisories, warnings, bulletins, that kind of world. That's roughly half of what we do, and the other half is in this best practice, right? What do we learn from all this technology and attacker tradecraft, and how do we translate it into specific concrete things that people can do about it?
Right.
So we're the world's largest producer, believe it or not, of what we call security configuration guidance. How do you configure a Windows desktop for best security effect, or a mail server or a web
Right.
server? And our model is around volunteerism. We bring people together to kind of hash all that out. And I always say, volunteer labor is great, but it doesn't come free. So
For
to
sure.
make it effective, you have to have a professional kind of organizing. Who's going to set the priorities, bring people together, publish the documents, keep them current, work with vendors to embed content into their products and so forth. So the model is create content, give it away,
Right.
and then sustain a nonprofit through kind of a membership and certification of vendor stuff model. So that's proven incredibly successful, and it allows us to, I can say with a straight face, we have kept security guidance current for 20 plus years.
Wow.
When many, and I say this with all respect to my ex-government friends, when for most parts of the industry, it's hard to keep anybody's attention for longer than a couple of years.
Right.
And so how do you, that sustainment mechanism is an important part of what we do. So my whole life is around sort of, trying to understand attackers and flaws and risk in total. And then in the second half or so of my life is about, okay, how do we translate that into action? So that's my life in this stuff.
Outstanding. Well, man, that's an amazing history and amazing background. So let's dive in. So
Sure.
what are some of the topics that keep you guys, up at night, and that really are your main focuses around all things cyber, whether it's manufacturing or commercial or whatever? Like, what are the things that are really you guys are focused on in the forefront today?
Yeah, I think this has always been kind of an arms race, and I grew up in this sort of national security business, right?
Yep.
Like nation versus nation, and
Sure.
how different that was.
Yeah.
Like companies don't raise an army to go fight, right? You pay your taxes, right? We build a sort of a central, defensive and attack machinery, and the historical notion is we hopefully we fight somewhere else. Right?
Sure.
Well, the cyber stuff, this is our economy, right? This is embedded in every part. So you have to get incredible amounts of collective action to make a dent in this, and it's so easy for the criminals to be involved, right? So you're now fighting not nation to nation, but every teenage joyrider, every political commentator with an axe to grind, every organized crime institution, and nations, and this is all happening all at once. And
Right.
Our kind of standard mantra at CIS is most of our economy, and I don't, I'm a very optimistic guy, but most of our economy, literally most, right, by any measure, number of companies, size, et cetera, cannot and will not be able to defend itself.
Right.
I mean, that's a realistic way, we think, to talk about it, right? They'll never hire a cyber professional. They aren't there to be hired. Right? The next dollar will not go towards cyber defense. It'll go towards something else. And so we can't, the traditional model that I grew up in, okay, you have a bunch of IT, you got a risky business, you download some advice from NIST or whoever you get it, and you kind of build it yourself, right? You
Right.
compose your security. That just doesn't work for most of our economy. So how do we deal with this problem on a much more aggregate level, right? This sort of large scale, how do we help people make good security decisions when they really don't have the expertise to do that, right?
Right.
They're running small businesses, right? And I live in an area where all my service providers are like two-person businesses.
Sure.
I really care about this because this is my doctor and my lawyer,
Yeah.
everybody, my dentist. And so that's real life for most of us here. So how
Yeah.
do we scale things is a big part of this. And sort of taking the ideas and how do you work, for example, further up the life cycle, with managed service providers? How do you link this with things like the economy that helps people make decisions,
Right.
about public policy, right? What do regulators encourage or discourage certain kinds of behaviors, right? The ability to get insurance encourages or discourages certain kinds of behaviors. So the challenge and that sort of our struggle is how do we scale this to try and line those pieces up? So it's a really interesting challenge because it's so far beyond the technical world I grew
Yeah,
up in, right?
absolutely.
If we could just invent the right thing, then we'll all be safer and hallelujah. But we don't do that in public health, right?
Right.
We don't count on magic and public transportation, right? When you choose to fly in a commercial aircraft, most of the risk management is under the hood.
Sure.
When you walk into a physical building, right? Most of the risk was it strength of the materials, the building procedures, the testing sign-off certification of the engineers who looked at all this kind of stuff. Almost all of that is hidden under the hood for good reason, right?
Right.
Because most of us don't have that kind of expertise to make a decision. So that kind of national credentialing, accepted body of knowledge, it doesn't give us perfect decisions, right? Accidents happen, people cheat, things fail, but it gives us the ability to manage risk without becoming an expert.
Right.
It allows us to make what is a reasonable decision, almost all the time. It's safe to get onto a plane. It's okay to walk down the street, with or without a mask or whatever the current circumstances are.
Sure.
So I think that's a key part of what we think about is how do we try to pull all that together. I mean, we're like everybody else and like you, right? We're faced with the daily. It is so hard to pull yourself above the noise of the,
Right.
oh my gosh, everybody's being hacked and whacked and all kinds of things are happening. And the business is inherently noisy, right? The marketing is crazy, the
Yep.
confusion. But I was, just finish with a thought, Aaron, is that, as a lifelong defender in this, right? What really gets to me some days is like never in our history of defense have we ever had so many great defensive tools.
Right.
Never in our history of defense have we known so much about attackers.
Right.
Never have we had such great training, tooling from the industry, et cetera. And yet we're losing ground, right?
Right.
You could say we're getting better, but I mean, the problem gets worse. And so that's the struggle here is that our kind of traditional ways of thinking about it are just not cutting it. So we really do need to think about this again, more to kind of economy and social, level rather than everybody, here's the advice, go read this documentation, go defend yourself, and it'll all add up to something good. It's clearly not worked.
Yeah, a lot of that is, the larger companies, the Googles and the Amazons and these big entities, like they have entire departments and groups of people that are focused around cybersecurity and network security, and they have a firewall team. And you mentioned that the 1 and 2 man, companies, one of those guys is not an IT guy. Like that's just not what it is. Like they're wearing multiple hats and they're probably not even wearing it that well. They're doing the best they can, but they don't have a background in cybersecurity. They don't have a background in this. Not to mention that, again, you mentioned it, and it doesn't have to even just be that small, but these businesses, all of these cyber tools, processes, people, process, and technology, that is money that's not going to something else. So they're really having to measure that risk to their business to say, is this risk enough that I need to spend this dollar on cyber process, technology, a person, whatever, outsource, managed services, capabilities, whatever, instead of buying something that'll make me, sell more widgets or whatever. So how do you entice those businesses to say, hey, this is important. It's not just cyber theater. It's not just the marketing that's, telling you the sky's falling, Chicken Little, that, everything is, the end times, but at the same time, they need to do something. So talk a little bit about how do we how you guys are focused around giving those people the understanding and even justification from a business perspective of why cyber risk is important, why they're going to spend that dollar on that, and where is important to do it.
No, that's a great. You're one of the core questions of our business, Aaron.
Sure.
I mean, the traditional model. Again, I'm an old guy, so this is how we grew up, right? Red teams, penetration testing,
Right.
zero-day finders. There was an implied notion in there, an implicit notion. If we'd find these problems, and we're going to tell people,
right,
and they're going to be so inspired or so scared that they're clearly just going to move out, right?
Sure.
To do this. Well, that has not worked.
No.
Not at any scale. Never
right.
in my career, right? They're impressed. Oh my gosh, your red team guys at NSA, they're so clever. But the economics, the psychology of fixing problems is a whole lot different than the challenge of finding them.
Right.
And so that by itself, it's important. I mean, I grew up as a vulnerability finder, lots of amazing people and great creativity that go into that. We need that, but that doesn't solve the problem. And so helping people think about that. So there's a couple approaches, and we're not, we follow this or participate, but this idea of putting these cyber decisions in a business context, right? That is consistent with other business decisions.
Right.
So there's lots of great brain power, looking at the economics of risk and the quantification, trying to put it into economic models and decision models. And, we have some involvement with that kind of stuff, have encouraged some work and sponsored some work around there. And, one of the problems with that in the past, so lots of people have been thinking about this for lots of years, but, I really believe, and I'm a bit of a contrarian, so forgive me a minute here, is that cyber is hard, right? The technology, it's complex, a lot going on, but we have made it harder even than it needs to be. All right, so all these well-intended things like security frameworks, and we produce one you could call a security framework, right?
Sure.
Our list of things to do. There are so many of them.
Which one do I choose?
Independently developed.
Right.
Different language, different level of abstraction, completely unrelated to each other, and that is actually contributing to the problem, right? Because everyone has decided, for whatever reason, if you handle credit cards, medical data, operate in this part of the world, et cetera, then you have a separate framework. And we've surveyed this with some of our company friends, right? It's the rare company that has to deal with just one framework.
Sure.
They got 3, 4, 5 or more looking over their shoulder because they might be dealing in this part of the world, handling credit cards, handling medical data, et cetera. And so people are now spending way too much energy, not on cyber, not doing the right things, but proving to auditors, assessors, and others that they have done the right thing in someone's eyes, right?
Sure.
In one of these 3 to 5 or 7 eyes. So that's a crazy, approach to this. Again, when you look at this at a kind of a national or a strategic or a social or a ecosystem level, we have made a small contribution to try. And one of the things I believe is that anybody who owns one of these cyber frameworks has a responsibility to try and make this simpler, right? To recognize they're not the only game in town. That we have to help the adopters. What we have done, I think is pretty rare, if not unique. We have committed at CIS, we will provide from our work to everything else we can find a authoritative technical cross mapping.
Right.
Because people often we're an independent nonprofit, right? No one has to pay attention to us.
Yeah.
But maybe they use the NIST cybersecurity framework. Maybe they PCI, right? For legal reasons, regulatory reasons, or whatever. And that's all good. But they use ours. Ours is kind of, all these things are at different levels of abstraction. Ours tends to be in the we've read all the threat data for you and we've translated it into these specific things, right? Which is different than the catalog approach. Here's a giant catalog.
Yeah.
Here's a risk management framework. Go pick from the catalog wisely and manage to that. And I'm just saying this, based on my experience, even large, well-funded government agencies really struggle with that.
Sure.
I mean, you need to take specialized people, access to threat feeds, all this kind of stuff. So the idea is we operate at a more prescriptive level. So people often use us as a kind of a technical roadmap. But my boss likes NIST CSF. The auditor is going to come about PCI. So we provide mappings that say, well, if you do this in our framework, that equates to this in the NIST CSF, equates to that in PCI, ISO, cloud controls matrix, et cetera. And if the other end will cooperate, and we're very close with folks like the Cloud Security Alliance and the NIST friends, then we try to produce one thing, right? So, and by the way, if we don't do it and the next auditor comes in, then you've got to do it, right?
Right.
You have to tell them, or the auditor has their own approach, or you pay someone, or you buy a commercial service to do that mapping for you. So for me, that's wasted energy and cost where we don't need to do that. So I put that on folks like us, also the creators of such things. So we're trying to carry the flag for, hey,
Yeah.
let's all recognize none of us is the only thing, and therefore we ought to do everything we can in our power to ease this burden on the adopters, right? The people who really have to make this work. And I think that's a fair, expectation for us socially, right? For the whole ecosystem. So we do that kind of work to help, make progress. I mentioned earlier, we're doing a lot of work because of our ISAC mission. We deal with state, local, and below governments every day.
Right.
So we're very closely involved with things where, and the kind of trend and a hot topic right now in DC, right? Voluntary standards for cybersecurity, or mandatory and regulatory, right? That's a classic, up and down over many decades battle here. We have focused primarily, and states in particular are really focused on voluntary.
Yeah.
Right. But not just, here's a good thing, we hope you do it. It's here's an incentive, right? So incentivized voluntary adoption means, use standard, accepted industry guidelines, frameworks like a NIST CSF, like us. And if you can demonstrate that your security program is based upon that, then your incentive might be things like protection from liability in case of a data breach, cap on punitive damages, limitations, unable to be sued for punitive damages. So that's what you're seeing, and we're seeing this now. We're tracking and involved with a number of states. It's becoming a trend, and it's as you watch this thing, right? There's sort of the pace at which DC works, right? The national government,
right?
But a lot of the common wisdom, which is true in many domains, the place to watch is the bellwether states, right? Because they like to have to live with the small businesses that are getting hit, so they feel very compelled to say, how do I improve this in a very organic, close to the ground way? So you watch the action there, because it's often a precursor to what will happen later nationally. So this is, again, I'm not taking a position here on mandatory versus voluntary, but this is a trend, and I think it's a healthy trend because it's a market driven. It's shown that it can cross the aisle in political parties in multiple states. It has this sort of voluntary nature, right? Companies can say, I can look at the risk and say, you know what, I'd rather take the risk, or I'll buy insurance, or that risk doesn't really apply to me. And that might be a reasonable decision that you could defend in court. Okay, and that's again putting it in the hands of the economy as opposed to sort of forcing people down the channel of behavior. So that's another area that we're active with, have some hope for. I think is worth watching. We're seeing that, so that comes from the IT kind of world, but a lot of this in your area, Aaron, around OT buildings, things like that, right? These are very no pun intended, concrete issues, right? The failure of the people mover system, right? The risk of physical damage, loss of life, and there's a whole regimen of building. It sort of almost fits better, right? There's building codes, there's inspectors, there's mandatory insurance, right? To just open the doors. So there's a fit there that is kind of in line with the way we have managed risk in physical space, right? So that's a healthy thing, right? It gives us, not so it becomes less about how do we make everybody smart about cyber. It's more about how do we fit the decision making about cyber in a context where people can make sense of it, right? Is the system certified? Is it, do they have insurance, right? Was it passed, was it inspected by someone that was certified, recognized, credentialed to do that inspection? So that's a more, again, a reasonable way to put the risk under the hood. It doesn't make perfect decisions, but it makes reasonable decisions that we can then operate as a society without being paralyzed. And right now, I'd say we're closer to paralysis on the cyber side because it's just so complicated. And practitioners, right? How much work do you have to do just to keep up with the new problems, the new technologies, the new tradecraft? And you're a professional, right? I'm sure you got a team of professionals behind you, and you're spending tons of money just to keep up and sort of think about this and how to help your customers. So that's that's all part of it. But also, A last thought down this thread. Pardon me. Pardon me for the cough. I did, skimming through your website and looking. You had a nice blog entry that rang with me. The role of compliance has always been, and I actually appreciate, and I'm very closely aligned with the position that was stated there. I don't know if you wrote it or somebody in the company, but this idea of, hey, compliance is not evil.
Right.
And in fact, it's the way it's not the sole component, but it's a major part of how we deal with risk, right? Think of, and there's on all my things to write someday before I leave this business on this earth, all these, I have a list of them here, the kind of things that might technically be true, but are not very helpful.
Right.
Inside. And one of them is the sort of snooty things that old guys like me say, and we're old guys. Well, a checklist is not compliance, right? You must avoid a checklist mentality. Well, yeah, that's technically true, but it's not very helpful, right? I don't know, but I've had heart surgery a couple of times. I'll share with your audience. The surgical team uses a checklist.
Absolutely.
I'm okay with that. Okay. Yes. I'm okay with that. I don't want anybody leaving a sponge or whatever. When I get on a commercial aircraft, right? These are highly trained professionals.
Absolutely.
They're running down the checklist. It doesn't prevent them from being smart, creative,
no,
dealing with emergency, but it sort of gets the rote stuff out of the way inexpensively, rapidly, repeatedly. Think of the noble. If you ever read the Checklist Manifesto, this is right out of that book. This is the checklists are a way to capture the mistakes of the past.
Sure.
Right. In a digestible form. I don't have to train everybody deeply in every mistake that's ever been made. It allows you a starting point, and it's a necessary starting point, right? That say, let's get these things out of the way. This is not all about wizardry and artwork, right? There's a lot of things that we should all expect are taken care of. It doesn't mean that every entry on that checklist is 100% correct or has been machine verified by super duper technology, but it's incredibly important to kind of set the expectation, try to capture the mistakes of the past in a way that that we don't miss the obvious, or the repeatable things are in fact repeated. So this idea of again, it takes us from this wizardry model of security. I always said wizardry. It's the model I grew up in, right? You hire kind of a little odd, unconventional people. You pay them a lot. You're not sure what they're talking about, but they're expensive, and But if and I saw this. I mean, I ran big machinery for this, the NSA Red Team, Blue Team, and things like that. People were like, "Oh my gosh, those folks are so clever." I need them. And what I found was, and this, your Red Team was amazing. They walked right through my perimeter. What do they recommend we do, to stop them next time? I said, well, they're nice people. They'll tell you what to do. Hey, install Microsoft patch number MS dash.
Sure, blah, 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 blah.
But next time they just go around that. They do something else, right?
They find another hole.
They give you a symptom of the disease.
Right.
Right. But at that time in history, I can say this with a straight face, nobody had worked on the NSA Red Team, right? This is way north of 100 people.
Right.
None of them had ever run a network bigger than would fit on a tabletop.
Sure.
Right. They don't know the language of system administration.
Right.
They don't know the tools. Right. So this in your business, right?
Right.
There's often a gap between this sort of cleverness of vulnerability finding, which is essential. Okay, but now how do I translate that? What is, what they were really exploiting at that time in history was the difficulty of configuration management,
sure,
right? Of a complicated, distributed network, which is its whole different set of tools and language and problems. And so you have to think of this as, I learned something, right? Think of the model I came up with back in the NSA days was, the Red Team is not the cure to cancer. It's a way to identify symptoms.
It's canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, and you need brain power. That's why I often say for CIS, the mantra in DC for many years. Again, I'm a pleasant contrarian here. Hey, if we all just, I'll probably get in trouble for this. If we all just shared all the incidents that happened to us, right? Everybody send it all to the government, to the FBI, to the ISAC, whatever. We would all have all this knowledge of incidents. We all be inspired, and we go off and fix it. Well, it's never ever worked. Number one, the amount of repetition is off the charts.
Yeah.
Right. It's crazy repetitive. So the verb that matters is not share, it's translate.
Right.
How do I translate millions of data points about attacks and technology into a small number of positive, constructive things that someone can do? Right. The upfront vulnerability finding is usually an attention getter. It's an
Sure.
identifier of a symptom. It's the canary in the coal mine. It says, something is not right about your program, that this kind of thing could happen. But it takes a specialized kind of thinking to do this translation. That's what we try to do at CIS. A good company, I think this is another way to think of the work that you do, right? You're there to, you have to convince the customer that you can operate on their behalf. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the ability of you and your team to translate that into specific action, and
Yeah.
to be able to help them understand these are the most effective things you can do to manage these types of risk, right? You try to educate them, not about technology or cleverness, but about the risk management part of this. So that's the way we try to think of it here, and I think is a healthier way to think of this.
Yeah, and I find that in the past it was, I'm going to try to do everything I can with the goal of, zero incidents. So if I look at like safety, I want zero safety issues. In cyber, especially when you start about these large complex environments, I've got, footprints in the cloud. I've got OT systems that are 40 years old. Like the goal, in my opinion, is not zero vulnerabilities, because that's unrealistic. There's very limited capability to go patch and plug every single hole of all the vulnerabilities that are infinitely possible, even the ones that we don't know about today. It's an impossible, you're constantly chasing your tail. A bigger perspective is really, how do I isolate that? How do I have a program around how do I respond to those things? And that's really why some of these programs really go into that. Like, it's not all about protect. It's not all about building this giant wall in front of these systems to stop bad actors or even misconfiguration, or you look at the latest FAA thing that brought down the system, and they say it was a contractor that deleted something. In my opinion, that's still a bad thing that happened in these environments. Whether or not it was a bad actor in China or a hacker doesn't really matter. It's something that impacted the system, and it was a single point of failure that brought it down. So understanding that from a business perspective, and letting the boards know, and the government and the people in general understand that it's not a goal of just stopping everything. It's a goal of isolating and limiting my risk from a business perspective. So if this line over here goes down, it doesn't take down my whole plant. Like that's a bigger way to, how do I isolate it? So when there is an impact, my whole system isn't down. Like Colonial Pipeline, I'm not shipping any gas whatsoever from now on. I have zero revenue coming in because everything was connected to this one system, and it was my single point of failure. So that message is important for people to understand and to change the mindset around cyber. And there's no silver bullet. My product or anybody else's product is not going to install my thing and all of your problems go away. You don't have to worry about hackers anymore. Like, you're done.
Yeah, people they want to think of this. Again, this is part of our kind of social evolution here, right? As an event, a technology. If I just train everybody to recognize phishing, those are all important parts.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, the metaphor I use, what we're really designing, right, is not a let's stop them. We're designing a machine, right? We're designing an ongoing machine that's fed by information. And so when you design a machine, you worry about things like resilience, you worry about redundancy, you worry about, mean time to failure and that sort of thing. And that's a healthy way to think of it, right? I give a talk. I'll share with you if you can stand cheesy sci-fi. I love cheesy sci-fi, Aaron. And so I have a whole talk I used to give on Independence Day or Groundhog Day, right? We all wish cybersecurity was like the movie Independence Day, right?
Right.
Will Smith, aliens are coming. We'd capture their scout craft. Brilliant people reverse engineer it, brilliantly create a virus, heroically fly up. The alien mothership is there. We know where it is. We go get it. We deliver, escape just in time, right? Boom goes the aliens.
Save the world.
So I've been in cyber defense for 45 years there, and no parade, no celebratory cigar for me, right? There's no end. It's not that kind of problem.
Yeah.
It's much more like, of course, Groundhog Day, right? Bill Murray, right? The machine is running, and it runs again every day. It's going to run again, and he takes information, right? He has a little memory. He's able to make a change. He sees, is the change beneficial? Is it not beneficial?
Right.
But that's closer to the mark here, right? We're designing something that we're going to. So and you hit a lot of those elements, very cleverly in there, right? It's yeah, you want to prevent things, but you have to
Sure.
balance that with this ongoing machinery to say, I know I can't hit 100%. I could make myself broke and bankrupt
Right.
by trying to, and now the first crack in the wall, I'm doomed. So
Right.
I want to balance my investment in a way that says, is my machine running? Right? What changes externally would change the parameters of my machine, right? How quick do I need to make the feedback? Right? Some things I need to know right away. That's really expensive. Some things, the CMDB, the database, or once a day or a week scan is sufficient. And so those are all risk decisions that you're making along the way. And so you're designing this sort of comprehensive machine so that you make reasonable decisions, right? I come from an environment that's war fighting, and so
Sure.
the commander says things like, the polite term is, are my networks ready to project force, right, to support, what amounts to sending expensive, deadly things forward to,
Yeah.
to cause harm. And what he's trying to get a handle on, right, is he's driven by the mission, right? As a business owner, is driven by the business, right? Am I, is it prudent for me to operate,
Right.
under these kinds of circumstances? They're not looking for a technical argument here about how many patches there were and all that. They're looking for a level of confidence, right, that gets developed over time as the machine runs, and that's one
Right.
way to think of it. I often say also in this business, and again, you hit it, I think, right on the money. Perfection is often the enemy of the good,
Yeah.
right? So this whole inventory thing, I know that's a big part of your products and so forth, is stumps people right away.
Right.
And some experts will say, oh, you need to do everything you can, 100% inventory of every,
Right.
otherwise the bad guy. Well, again, you're going to bankrupt yourself. And so, do we need 100% knowledge all the time?
Right.
We cannot do that. We cannot do that in physical space,
Right.
right? It's
Yeah.
complicated. It's just too hard. And again, then you will bankrupt yourself on one problem and not be able to sort of design the resiliency into your machine. So the story I tell, my dad was an Army supply sergeant, career guy, 3 wars, never fired a gun in anger except a grease gun. It was the standard family motto. But he's the one that gave me the story for this, Aaron. So he was a supply sergeant, right? So he's got warehouses full of stuff. And I remember him telling me one time, yeah, the inspector is coming next week. So I got to load up the deuce and a halfs, right? The big trucks with
Yep.
all the stuff I have that's not on the books. And I send it for a drive on the range, in the back part of the base while the inspector's here. Because if
Yeah.
I don't do that, I have nothing to trade with the other supply sergeants, right? For the stuff that they don't have that's missing.
Right.
So it's a constant. And so but the lesson is, when the commander says, are we ready to move out? Right. My dad has no ability to give a 100% answer.
Sure.
But through, I call it decision, intuition, and experience, you can say, we're close enough. Yeah, if he says go, we can load the trucks, essentially, not literally every gun is ready to go, everything is inspected, but good enough for the purpose of executing the mission. And
Yeah.
we're a long way from there. But a lot of times our own industry, right, because it's so technology oriented, oh, well, you were able to patch all these, but you didn't patch that.
Right.
How realistic is that, right? Is it outward facing? Is there known exploits? Has it ever been exploited? And so we tend to get wrapped around, kind of esoteric technical arguments and lose sight of but what does a business need to do to have confidence, right? That they're protecting their customers' information, that they're able to,
Sure.
safely conduct a transaction through their supply chain. A lot of this is supply chain stuff too, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's not that I'm not going to have 100% confidence in any member of my supply chain. And but I need a system that says, and the way I tried to talk about this when I was still in government was, we move, and again, I grew up in a world where you'd say, you could say loosely, trust is a binary condition, right? You have a security clearance or you don't. I mean, that was my
Right.
world.
Yeah.
You're a DoD approved supplier or you're not. There's
Right.
no in between. It's
Yeah.
one or the other. And we send somebody out to inspect your facilities and make sure your people are cleared and blah, blah, blah. But that's inconsistent with a modern supply chain, right?
Right.
You say, I've got literally thousands of suppliers. And by the way, if I'm a sensible, sort of the top of the food chain here, I actually want it to be inexpensive to bring new suppliers in. I
Sure.
want lots of suppliers. I want the best prices. If you can't meet my timeline or my prices, next one comes up. But now I can't afford a really expensive, slow way to do that. I need
Yeah.
a quick way to manage that transaction to a new supplier, which calls for kind of a universal way to think of it, right? And see, the government often, again, I'm an ex-government guy, the government will solve this problem for the government, and then they'll kind of spill over to everybody else.
Right.
That does not work in this world where the big players, right? You know, and by the way, the nuts and bolts supplier to the DoD wants to be the nuts and bolts supplier to auto manufacturers and to
Right.
Walmart, you know, so they want, you know, they're not looking to be locked in. They're looking to be flexible because they know they could be pushed out for something other reason, right? So we have this need for a way to kind of make these decisions. And I call this a dynamically generated trust, right? So trust becomes not binary, but I have to generate it for the purpose. So I trust you to be in my supply chain,
Right.
but only for this purpose and for this period of time.
Right.
Right. Then this purpose might mean, you know, a lot of this was pioneered in the early big retailing and automotive manufacturing, right? If I want to have just-in-time manufacturing, right, or like with the Walmart with suppliers, right? You know, it's, oh, the shelves are getting low. Well, the supplier has access to a database that lets them know to just go ahead and ship, right? The contract is not for this boxcar load at this time.
Right.
It's for, you'll keep this inventory level. So that means, you know, any transaction, any supply chain thing like this, it requires data, right, and control, right, data paths and control paths. So
Yep.
the trust is for that purpose, but Walmart's not going to give you access to all their database of all their inventories,
Of
including
course
your
not. No.
competitors. Right? DoD, and this is a, you know, again, the DoD, it was the early days was coalition war fighting, right? The war fighting in the Middle East, where you never go to a war without your friends.
Right.
The problem is you don't know who your friends are until the day before you go to war, right? It's all political arm twisting and building alliances.
Sure.
And now, I mean, this is like some of the most dangerous stuff on earth, right? You've got all these countries working together against one or more. You have to share things like radar information. Where are the good
Right.
guys? Where are the bad guys? And because really bad things can happen if you don't get that right.
Yeah.
But I only want to share this information of this type for this period of time with
Right.
these folks. Some I trust more, some I trust less. And by the way, half of them don't trust us either, right? This is all
Sure.
complicated.
Yeah.
So now you're the poor IT guy trying to make all this work, right? How do I, you know, respect all this separation at the same time provide what's called a common command and control or situational awareness picture for all these folks, right? So that's kind of the extreme warfighting example, but think of that as projected into our economy. And now you're saying, wow, this you know, this is like the sort of high level version of zero trust, right? I have to generate trust over and over again
Yeah.
for multiple parties, for process, you know, down to the process level, machine level, user level, you know, up to the transaction business level. It's sort of one slightly sideways way to think about that there. So all that I think, you know, begs for a comprehensive approach to this, right? That there aren't sort of nice, neat critical infrastructures. There's not nice, neat supply chains that we can partition out as a separate thing from other things. So again, it's really exciting, right, in terms of the economy and the, you know, the power, right, to build resilient systems. But it's boy, it's fragile too.
Well, and it brings so much complexity. You know, supply chain is so. I mean, all of these are big problems, right? But supply chain. You look at a lot of the events that happened in the Target attack, and a lot of these. Those attacks didn't actually come from the bigger company. They came from the smaller suppliers. So as Target, as all of these big companies, I don't only just have to manage my environment, but any contractor and subcontractor connection, all of those parties are risks to my overall ability to do business, because that back door that supplier has that I wasn't even aware of, I assume, hey, he's doing a good job. I like Bob. Bob's a good guy. He's good at whatever he does. But you don't realize that Bob, you know, connects his laptop to Starbucks, and when he connects it to your laptop, he just brought that in, and you gave him a badge. So all of those things are just add complexity, and sometimes these problems get to be so big. It's like, you know, how do you eat an elephant? Like, it's overwhelming because there's supply chain and remote access and compliance and all of these big issues. As a small guy, or even a medium-sized guy, how do you know? It's so overwhelming to say, how do I can't do it. Like, there's no way I can protect all of these things. Like, I'm not going to sleep at night. I could hire every cyber professional in the world and never solve all these problems. Right.
Oh, exactly. You know, and then, you know, getting back to the days when I worked closely with the military, I can't tell you how many times, you know, people with multiple stars on their shoulders said, and they're the responsible decision maker, right? They
Right.
sign off on. And how many times I heard this? I accept the risk.
Sure.
And you know, being in the room with them, they're not saying that because they've gotten all this great input and they're able to, like, you know, cleverly, intellectually weigh all the options, and these are people that are used to taking risk, right?
Yeah.
They get frustrated at some point by the complexity, by the technology, by the the different language that technologists use, the IT stuff in particular. They most of them didn't grow up in technology, so they
Sure.
have no intuition, right? What saved the general, and from my dad, the supply sergeant, was they had some decision intuition, right? They said, we don't need it to be perfect in order for us to make a good enough decision for the purpose. A lot of senior decision makers are still struggling to get to that, right?
Yeah.
They're overwhelmed by the wizardry. They look around for the scruffiest person in the room. This person must know the most. I
Right.
tell them sometimes that's just the scruffiest person in the room. They may
Right.
not know the best, but they're kind of seeking. That's the wizardry model, right? They're seeking their own wizard to guide them, and so I put that on our industry. Right?
Yeah.
We have to do a better job, right? Our job is not to scare or inspire. Our job is to help people manage risk. And to do so means take this complexity and put it in their terms, right? Put it in the way they think about risk, the way they make those decisions. That means changes in what constitutes useful output from us, right? Lists of vulnerabilities, not helpful, right?
Yeah.
Lists of complicated, you're in compliance with this thing, or you're not helpful, right? But putting it in the context of what risk am I taking if I entered into this supply chain agreement, if I choose to now offer banking services through the web, that's the responsibility of the people who kind of come from the technology up to take that extra step, right, to put it into that context. And we talked earlier, I mean, there's great people in the quantification world that have done that. Again, it can be having worked with economists, quant jocks, and all kinds of people over many years, we love to create models that make sense for us.
Sure.
And maybe, again, does that work for other people? I mean, you probably have a sense of, from the work that you do, the complexity of the models that underlie building insurance or things
Yeah.
like that, right?
Yep.
I mean, these are very specialized people. They have the virtue of lots of data of history. They can estimate the cost of rebuilding a structure of a certain type in this part of the country. They know the weather patterns for hurricanes in Florida, and
Right.
the likelihood of it going A, B, C. So they have a lot of data to work with, but the models are, and they, rightfully, the complexity is hidden from the average citizen.
Sure.
It gets boiled up to a higher level where you can make decisions, right, about risk that allow an insurance company to offer you a personal life insurance policy, right, based upon really a small number of factors, right? Your lifestyle, your age, smoker, non-smoker, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where we need to be. I think we need to find more ways to do that. That allows you then to, tie in, the economics, the sort of behavioral economics of how people make decisions, the public policy, the market support elements like insurance and so forth, into something that I think is closer to where we're going to wind up in all this.
Yeah, I agree. I work for a software company, obviously, but my past and my history, I've been a consultant for Ernst & Young and worked as an end user owner operator for a power utility. I owned a real estate company and did all that stuff, and ultimately it comes down to, in my opinion, it's not the sexy technology. It's not the new product that comes out. There's no silver bullet. There's none of that that's going to solve it. What's going to move this forward and protect all of buildings and supply chain and critical infrastructure, power utilities, all of these big systems that are so complex, is the basic blocking and tackling. A lot of the products, it's not a product, it's people, process, and technology. It's the bigger picture of a program of understanding how to be nimble, how to respond, how to look. What am I looking for? What does good look like? I mean, you go talk to a lot of these people, they don't even know what good looks like, much like, how do I find bad if I don't know what good looks like, right? So it's understanding that, yes, I need an asset inventory, but I don't need 100%. Yes, I need to have, strong outsides. I don't want to put my control system or my accounting system on the internet wide open so that people can get to it. Like, there's some basic capabilities, and then all the rest is like, like you said before, like, I'm going to accept that risk. Like, I'm not going to go patch all of my systems in my OT space across 10,000 devices every Tuesday. Like, there's no way I can keep. I'd have to hire an entire organization to do that. And what is the risk return on my investment for that? It's probably pretty low, because the probability of that being the attack vector, or me patching every Tuesday, going to stop that, is not great. So, I mean, ultimately, I believe it's the bigger picture of what a program looks like, understanding that. And I love what you said around the the incentives for businesses to want to do this thing, right? Compliance is really easy to swing a hammer and punish someone for not following the guidelines. But what about the other side of that, is enticing people to do it because it's the right thing to do. And hey, they also get a benefit, lower insurance costs, whatever that may look like. All of these are ways that we can entice people to do what we need to get done without just checking a box for compliance. Well, I did that over there because those were required. What about all the rest of the assets? Well, those weren't required by compliance, so I didn't do it. Right.
Right. Yeah, I think that is right. So there's a sort of a systemic look that, again, we're involved in some of that kind of thing. We can't claim we're going to solve the problem here at the little Center for Net Security, but I think that there are plenty of signs that, again, the tide has moved in the right direction. Which is this. The role of law firms, judges, insurance companies, auditors, et cetera, really has shifted a lot. And I think that's again, it can be uncomfortable, right? Because it's not a linear path. There's a lot of left and rights going on here, but I think it's the right answer in terms of the way we balance all this across our economy, the way we help small, medium. Every time I said small, you added medium. You're exactly right there. Medium-sized companies, right?
Yeah.
Are for the purpose here, are just as vulnerable, unable to invest enough, will never be able to educate enough, and can't sort of buy their way out of this problem. But even giant companies are struggling with this all the time. The example, this thing that interlocks us all, right? These complicated business relationships. You talked about supply chain, and the Target example. I mean, they're you need to, a standard part of a traditional security approach, right? Assess your risk, look at all your connectivity and dependencies and all this. That's built into every framework ever. But my experience has been assume that whatever answer you come up with is wrong. You almost never understand your dependencies until something breaks. And I had no idea. This, what do you mean this got subbed out to this, got subbed out to whatever, and so had a badge, or they had system access. So you have to assume you're going to be wrong, right? That doesn't mean you don't do it.
Sure.
It means you don't think of it as the cure.
Right.
You
I'm
think
done.
of it as a necessary step. Yeah. And now you say, okay, now I know something's going to come up.
Right.
And these dependencies that you don't understand are going to bite you. So be prepared for them, right? Be prepared for this serendipity or this occurrence. And that's part of the machinery here, is right. You're looking for things, even though you know that you've done one good faith attempt. And as we all know, any assessment of all my dependencies is about as good as about the first 5 minutes after the auditor leaves, right? You're just things are changing. That's the nature of our economy.
Yeah.
And the companies that get bought and sold or disappeared or sub out something, there's just a range of these connectivity dependency issues that we don't understand, which again speaks for even giant companies can't solve that problem, right?
Yeah.
We need to make that kind of a universal. What is our term social expectation, right? What should little companies sort of just do that's within their reach?
Sure.
Most of which can be pushed to their service provider, to their cloud provider, upstream a little bit. How do we educate? Our experience is many of the small businesses we know have outsourced their IT to other small businesses, right? Managed service providers, some of whom are really good at security, but most of them don't have the resources.
Yeah.
And why don't they invest in security when you ask them? Well, no one's paying for it.
Yeah.
Right. So you have a supply and demand, so you have to, for us, the role shifts to say, for those kind who really are better off outsourcing their IT, you want to, what you're really doing next is not teaching them to build security. You're teaching them to become smarter buyers of security through service providers. And then you have to work with the service providers to say, if you could advertise what you do and sort of align it in a way that's consistent with good practice, then that allows you to advertise and invest, right? To advertise that to the customers who are now being encouraged to ask for this because it allows them to get insurance. It provides them protection from liability in case of a data breach, et cetera. So again, so you need sort of structures that cut across different parts of the economy, right? Connect the work of companies like yours with the regulatory frameworks and those kinds of things. And I think that's again, I might have sounded pessimistic, but I'm a complete optimist. I said you can't last, decades in this business without being one of two personality types, right? The complete pessimist or the hopeless optimist.
Right.
And both parties have all the data they need to convince themselves they're right.
Absolutely.
If you want to be negative, like, hey, see, I told you so, hack, bad, 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 bad.
Yeah.
Okay, I got that. But, there's also plenty of great signs, right? Great
Yeah.
companies, great work, some hope in standards, sort of, a lot of what we're doing today is to fight today's fight more efficiently. We can't afford to keep scaling that, right? We need a different fight. We
Yeah.
need, sort of more built into our infrastructure, the standards that underlie the internet. No one designed the internet, just the economic engine for the world.
No.
That's just history. And so a lot of this is sort of rethinking how we conduct these transactions in a way, and the role of privacy and anonymity and so forth in this. But I'm an optimist. Again, I keep working because I believe there's more to be done. So
speaking of that, what is the one thing that you are most optimistic about in the upcoming 5 to 10 years that gives you hope in this space, that we're making progress, that my kids and grandkids will have the ability to turn the lights on and it work when they expect it to, right?
Yeah, I think I've talked about it a fair amount, which is this the term that we're using is reasonableness.
Yeah.
The sort of setting an expectation in things like regulation, state law, and so forth around that. So and a technical basis for that. So the typical, and again, I'm a non-lawyer, but the language is often, to get these incentivized benefits, right? If you can demonstrate a reasonable security program, a documented program based upon these things, there's a couple, then you get this kind of incentive, right? The protection. The hopeful thing in there is it's not asking for perfection. It's not asking you to be done. It's saying, are you making reasonable choices, right? You have a documented program. Doesn't mean you're halfway through, 3/4, or 100% done. It means you have a plan. You can show that you're executing on this plan. The plan is a vetted one through a NIST, through us, through some trusted source. And it allows you to then to kind of put it in the context of the business owner.
Yeah.
And I know this is, for a lot of technologists, this is a bit esoteric, but I see a lot of hope here because state, legislators, they're good people too. They just don't speak techno speak, right?
Sure.
They want to protect their citizens, the businesses. They want to encourage businesses in their jurisdictions. So they're really anxious to do something. Business owners don't want to be paralyzed. They want to be able to, to project into new markets and do all these things. And so, we're seeing a convergence of this again as a more of a economic and social phenomena, which I think, and I think the current administration is tied into these and is certainly taking a more heavy-handed, direct approach around regulatory issues that particularly affect the areas that you're working in. And I think there's going to be some kind of push and tug to kind of figure out how all will work out. But that gives me hope. I think there's a lot there. And I'm going to spend my whole life in this business, Aaron. And there are so many great people, right, of goodwill.
Yeah.
Right? Like yourself. I mean, you're running the company, obviously, right? And you have to do right by the company, but you're doing a lot of things that are not about the company. It's about the world that we're in.
Right.
How do I educate? How do I bring more people into this? How do I better connect, the technology with decision making? There's so many great people who are doing that. I think that's one of the things. That's why I'm in nonprofit in my second career. Is that it provides kind of a glue mechanism to pull things together, right?
Right.
These amazing people. If you're old enough in technology, you're actually kind of irritated by the world today. Like, how did we build like such a great engine for all these criminals? What were we thinking?
Right.
But we didn't. We didn't do that. It was all built for the. I'm naive enough to remember and old enough to remember. Like, oh, everyone will have all this access to all the great information of the world. We'll make better decisions. Kumbaya, happy, happy. Oh my gosh, where did that go? What we built is a great intelligence machinery and criminal machinery of our time.
Absolutely.
But I think that. So there's a lot of commitment, and I know many of the folks who are, I'll call first generation, who've gone into now they're in nonprofits, they've gone back into government. My God, what are they thinking? Great people though that have gone on to take on some of the nation and the economy's toughest challenges. So, I look around at that and I go, wow, we could do this. I really believe, and I see the next generation, folks like you coming up, and I just go, man, if we can't make progress with all the great people, momentum, and opportunity in front of us, then that's on us. But I think it's there to be had. And again, having the pleasure of being part of this for so long, I just, I don't think it's hopeless optimism. I think it's
Yeah.
reasoned optimism that there's a real opportunity in the next, several years for us.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And it's an exciting place to be. And I'm glad to have opportunities to talk to people like you and building cybersecurity and your organization. And so for you, kind of last question, like what do people want to get involved and what does, the Center for Internet Security need, and what are you looking for? How do people connect with you from a end user perspective, from a business owner perspective? Kind of talk to us about that.
Sure. The kind of the easiest way, if you want to find me, I'm a LinkedIn sort of a guy, reluctantly, but that's the place where we connect. But I'm easy to find there. As far as the company, CISecurity.org.
Okay.
Right. So that's our nonprofit. There's a general email address, and if you ask, they'll connect you to me. There's lots of great stuff. Again, our model is volunteerism, give the content away.
Sure.
And so there's tons of content. If you believe you have the chops and you are that community spirit minded, we run our own social media platform where the volunteers connect and work together to create the products, right? And that's sort of our big pool that really provides a lot of the energy and talent that does these things. You can get an account on there at no charge. Again, this is just, we're a sort of community. When people ask me what I do in my second act, I said, kind of a community activist, organize.
Yeah.
And it's very gratifying coming from a big government, giant agency kind of background,
right,
to see this energy and the willingness to work together. So you can reach me through CISecurity.org is another way, or they'll connect you with the right kind of folks that are, if you have a specialized area. I often said, not so much for the tiniest companies, Aaron, but for many companies, every company typically has somebody that's really good at one aspect of security.
Yeah.
But not every aspect, right?
Sure.
No one can. It's just too gigantic. And so another sort of value of having a nonprofit or an independent place to gather is to connect these complementary pieces of expertise into one, right?
Right.
None of us can afford the full range of people that, even companies like you are struggling, I'm sure, to get the right talent in the door. And now they're, little businesses are competing with you. So the idea is, if we can band them together, we can create products. And I often say, if you like one of our security benchmarks for Windows 10 or whatever you want, you're getting the benefit of expertise of people you'll never hire.
Right.
Even if you could find them, right? You can't find them, much less
or
pay
afford
them
them.
their worth.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so you don't need to recreate what the big guys can do. You need to say, what's the translation, right? Where can I find people who, again, are transparent about what they do, make their work available at, in a reasonable market-driven way that I can benefit from without having to sort of become one of them.
Yeah.
We like them, but we can't afford them. So let's focus on what we can do. And that's what's really the focus here. So yes, reach out to me. I'm pretty accessible, and I still have a little bit of time left in this business, I hope. So there's plenty more to do.
Well, sir, I really appreciate you, all that you guys are doing, all that you've done in your career, and taking the time today to speak with me. I'm humbled by your appearance, and I look forward to more conversations in the future, potentially, and working to support you guys any way I can. So thank you very much.
Oh, such a pleasure. Take care, and thanks for having me.